The movie opens with an ominous scene. The lake is colored violet in the evening, and on its surface lies a figure of a girl, floating seemingly lifelessly. Suddenly, she moves reactively and continues swimming. Bastian, a 13-year-old teenage boy, is traveling with his family. Loving mother and father, younger sibling, an overcast day, a lake house that is waiting to be filled with people again, and a promising summer, everything seems peaceful and relieving. Louise, a friend of the family, and her daughter Chloe should be waiting for them in the lake house, but when they get there, nobody's there. The house seems abandoned and stiff, as if nobody has opened the windows for quite some time. Violet and Ramin, Bastian's parents, however, are feeling great. They cannot wait to go for a swim, and are sure that other people will be there too. Bastian and his younger brother find their beds in the room that seems to have been occupied by Chloe, and they all head towards the lake. There, they remember what it is like to jump into freezing cold water after a scalding hot day. A storm comes in the night. Pelting rain and thunderclaps force Bastian to only play asleep. He opens his eyes once and sees a figure of a girl, covered all in shadow in the moonlit night, crouched in front of him and looking at him. He doesn't move an inch, nor does he get afraid. He just continues looking at her until the latter turns around and goes to sleep. The next morning, we understood who that was. As Bastian enters the living room, grabs a watermelon, and plays some tunes on an old piano, we are introduced to Louise and Chloe. The latter is extremely anxious and frustrated, trying her best not to be rude, but in saying nothing and refusing to engage in any kind of conversation, she comes out a little ill-mannered. She seems to be mad at the boys for ruining her quiet summer and solitude in the room. She doesn't want any company. Her storming away finally enraged Louise. Even though Violet and Ramin are relaxed and laid back, she follows Chloe and demands that she take the boys to the pier. Chloe has to obey, and so, in the next scene, Bastian is sitting on a couch listening to music, while Chloe is lying on the pier in the sunlight. The afternoon is peaceful. The little brother is proudly looking for colorful stones, while Chloe scrolls through her phone. Here, Bastian fetches a cold drink for her, and they have their first conversation. The interaction is short. They don't really know what to talk about in these kinds of situations, or how to keep rekindling small talk with a stranger. Bastian gets back to the couch and looks at Chloe, who undresses herself and jumps into the water. She invites Bastian to join her. He becomes restless and awkward, but he isn't ready to turn down this kind of offer, so he heads towards the shore anyway and goes into the lake slowly, keeping his shirt on. When Chloe asks what his deal is, we learn that he almost drowned once. That's why even the thought of swimming again makes me sad for him. Unexpectedly, his subject of losing life makes Chloe reveal a very interesting part of her personality. At first, she tells him of a ghost that is haunting this lake, and then she tells him how wonderful it must be to drown. If you ask her, it must be an awfully delightful experience, your lungs filling with water as your body longs for fresh air. Bastian is a little weirded out by this, but he says nothing. The teenage girl in front of him dives into the water. Bastian keeps his gaze locked on the surface of the water, but the water remains still. Chloe stays underwater for a long time. She lies on the trail in the next scene. Hair is on her face, and she seems lifeless. She's playing deceased. The boys come to her and give back her phone. It seems like Chloe asked them to take a picture of her like this. The next morning, the two families are on a boat. Bastian watches this weird girl as her hair is swirling in the breeze and thinks about her unusual habit, her obsession with the She seems to be a part of some other magnificent, wonderful world. The family visits Brian, Louise's friend, who makes wine. From the conversation between the adults, we learn a little more about their relationship and history. As it seems, Violet and Louise were best friends from childhood. They used to spend their summers in the lake house, and each other was all they had, until this French Mr. Enchantment came along and stole Violet away. Bastian is watching a cartoon with the kids in the next scene. Chloe comes to him quietly and asks him if he often spends this much time with kids. Bastian is a little ashamed, so he follows her right away. They exit the house and head towards a swamp. Chloe is holding a bottle of wine. She seems to already be quite accustomed to the taste of it. When she hands it to Bastian, the latter tries his best not to show his lack of experience in drinking. He seems tense. He knows that he must show himself as cool and reserved, but he has no idea how to do it, or what to talk about. Chloe seems laid back, though. She asks him to hold out his hand. Then she shows him something weird. If you pair two hands and brush across the fingers, you feel as if you are touching a corpse. Now, Bastian understands which subject he should propose. He knows one weird thing. If you try to bite yourself until you bleed, your brain automatically stops you. Chloe is impressed. She immediately gets invested in this conversation, and starts. For the first time, the two of them seem to really connect, but suddenly, two boys appear out of nowhere and scare them. One of them, Stan, seems to be Chloe's good friend, and the other one is visiting for the first time. Stan introduces him as Oliver and asks Chloe to give him a cigarette. All the while, Bastian is quiet. With no social skills, he faces the swamp and says nothing, as if he isn't even there. When Chloe introduces him to the friend, the latter acts politely and openly, while Bastian turns around for just a second until he gets back into his safe shell again. The three decide to go to the wild part of the lake. the part where, according to Chloe, the ghost of the lake resides. As they walk away, Bastian doesn't move. He thinks he doesn't belong with them. Chloe mustn't want him to tag along either. Now she has some other boys who seem to be much more competent than him, so there must be no reason why Chloe would want him to go along. And so, he stays crouched in front of the swamp, but suddenly he hears Chloe's surprised voice. Immediately, delighted she wants him there, Bastian jumps up and heads towards them at a high pace. They walk along a wide trail through the woods, heading towards the wild part of the lake. Here, while Chloe has a long conversation with Oliver, Bastian quietly follows them along, still having no idea how to remind everybody of his existence. From the conversation, we learn that Chloe is 16, while Oliver is 19. His father, Brian, just recently bought a cabin here. Chloe's mother seems to be quite keen on him. Meanwhile, the campaign arrives at the lake, and Stan decides to go for a swim. Bastian walks back and forth, looking at his feet, while Chloe tells her new friend that her mother, Louise, has a tendency to win the hearts of the new arrivals, and then leave them once she gets bored. Oliver's father is probably her next prey. Suddenly, as Chloe says this, they hear a desperate scream and a noise of splashing water. Stan is in a state of panic. He reactively comes to the shore, still in shock, and as he tries to catch his breath, he tells everybody how he felt somebody, or something, grabbing his feet in the water. The story he tells sounds horrifying, but the degree to which he oversalts his performance makes a smart kid like Bastian smile. Immediately he knows that all of it is made up. And he turns out to be right. As he invites the other two to come join him in the lake, and as Chloe stands up to prepare herself for the cold water, Bastian says that he will be heading back and turns to leave. Chloe doesn't protest to it, and so the teenage boy goes back home alone. He's too old to be afraid of walking along a narrow path in the woods in broad daylight, but suddenly, he hears a girl crying in the distance. The noise is abrupt, and Bastian looks around to determine the direction from which it came. But he sees nothing. The woods are quiet, until he hears footsteps coming rapidly towards him and a loud shout. Terrified, he jumps back and cries out in only to discover that it is Chloe. Instead of staying with the adult boys, she followed him. The thought changes Bastian's mood instantly. Chloe prefers to be with him. Out of nowhere, and perhaps even for the first time, Bastian feels overwhelmingly confident. The fear of trying new things leaves him completely, and he takes the wine bottle from Chloe to chug it down bravely. Chloe is impressed, that much is true, but Bastian's self-confidence was clearly exaggerated. The entire bottle of wine is out of his system after a few minutes. Fortunately, he was quick enough to get to the toilet. Chloe is amused. She helps him by letting him imagine all the disgusting food. In the end, Bastian tries to stand up straight. This process takes much longer than usual. The kid is still really drunk, embarrassed, and afraid that he's going to puke again. There are two things he needs most now, cleaning up and sobering up. And so, Chloe tells him to get into the bathtub. She helps him take off his shirt, and he strugglingly gets down into the tub. His drunken face sobers up immediately, not from the running water, but from seeing Chloe as she gets in the tub with him. In the following few minutes, she has a lot of fun playing with his hair, and frankly, Bastian has no power to do anything. All the wine he's consumed forces him to take on the role of an observer in this situation, which is awfully unfamiliar, but strangely mesmerizing to him too. That night, a distant whisper wakes Bastian up. He looks over and sees Chloe's bed empty. Slowly and quietly, he stands up and gets down to drink some water. As he turns his back to the window, we see the figure of Chloe walking past. Bastian catches a glimpse of her from another window and quietly follows him to the lake. There, he sees an unusual picture. Chloe is swimming alone in the lake, whispering something to herself. She has no idea that somebody is watching her mumble something incomprehensible. Bastian spends the entirety of the next day with his family. At first, we see him act unusually rudely towards his brother, but then we understand that he was only playing with him. While they all play ball in the next scene, Chloe rides past them, and Bastian ends up a little hurt. Chloe didn't even say hello. Later that day, he asks his father to repair his old bicycle, and sees Chloe walking past them as she talks on the phone in English. Now, Bastian is really upset. Immediately he knows who she's talking to. He cycles to the wild part of the lake to find some solitude, and when he gets back, he asks his mother if the story of a ghost in the lake is true. Naturally, the answer is that Chloe isn't to be trusted when it comes to such stories. She tends to make them up to get attention. Meanwhile, evening comes, and Bastian goes to the pier to see the sunset and listen to music. A figure of a ghost appears in the woods behind him and starts slowly creeping towards him. When it touches him, he jumps up and screams uncontrollably and pushes it into the lake. Gradually, he gets more and more afraid as the figure starts floating on the surface, showing no sign of life whatsoever. Bastian starts screaming at it, and finally freezes in place in horror. Even if he was sure that it's some toothless joke, he is too afraid to jump into the water to save whoever it was. Of course, it is Chloe. Suddenly she starts moving. She scolds him for not even trying to save her, then they both laugh. In the end, Chloe tells him that she's going to a party tonight. He's welcome to tag along. In the next scene, Bastian is standing in the middle of the room, anxious about the party, while Chloe is taking a shower. After a while she shouts at him, asking if he sees a top lying on her bed. When he fails to find it, she enters the room anyway, wearing only a bra. Bastian is startled. He averts his eyes, sits down, and gets especially interested in his feet. Chloe finds his appearance unsuitable and gives him one of her shirts to wear. Then she tells him something that truly hurts his heart. She says that the little girls at the party will fall for him immediately. She makes him turn around, then changes into her party clothes. Bastian tries his best to remain indifferent and reserved, but clearly his smile is partially bitter. They walk down the dimly lit road alone in the next scene, talking about ghosts, until they reach the house in which the party is held. Bastian has never seen anything like it. Loud music and hormone-driven teenagers are trying to have as much fun as possible all around. Bastian wants to feel included. He seems reserved and cool, as if he has been to 100 such parties. After Chloe fetches beers, Oliver appears out of nowhere and steals her away. It is obvious that he's flirting with her. Bastian follows them through the crowd and into the backyard. There, Oliver assumes that Bastian and Chloe are related. As if it wasn't enough that Chloe regards him as a little boy, it seems that now he's her little brother as well. As the young men make ghost-related dirty jokes, Chloe sees her ex-boyfriend kissing another girl. Oliver invites her to dance with him, and she stands up to follow him. At this point, Bastian is wearing a ghost mask that someone threw at him. Even though he isn't willing to follow them, Chloe takes him by force, and there, out of nowhere, we learn how well Bastian can dance. Everybody's impressed. Seeing him dance doubles everybody's energy, to the point that they just start shouting for no reason. Bastian comes out of the crowd, then, to catch his breath and have a sip of beer. He looks back through the moving limbs of dancing teenagers, and sees Chloe and Oliver gradually getting more and more intimate. The dancing and the reaction it caused give Bastian an overwhelming amount of confidence. He will get back in there now and take Chloe from that nobody. And so, feeling powerful, he approaches the dancers, but after taking a step or two, gets hit in the nose. He starts bleeding, and in immediate shock, he turns back. His confusion is gone. Now all he wants is to get away from this party as soon as possible. On his way back, he sees a sorrowful, ominous picture, the body of a fawn on a concrete road. Bastian is woken up in the middle of the night by an unfortunate occasion. He is washing his underwear in the next scene, and while in the process, he hears footsteps coming into the house. It's Chloe. Reactively, he takes care of the rest of the business and rushes into the bedroom. He covers himself with a thin white blanket. She tells him how the party went after he left. It seems like it was much more fun with him around. Then she calls him into her bed. Bastian gets terribly anxious, but he joins her anyway. As they whisper to each other, we understand more and more that they are much alike. Even though they are trying so hard to pretend to be adults, both are children. They sleep together that night, and spend most of the day with each other too. After posing as a ghost and taking pictures, and after trying to bite they are bleeding while walking along the shore of the lake, they land on the subject of their worst fears. Both are extremely reluctant to say what they are most afraid of. And so, the agreement is that they are both going to say it together. Unfortunately for him, however, Bastian is the only one saying it after the countdown. And it isn't losing his younger brother, cancer, or water, it's something very childish and naughty. Chloe is amused by this. She comes up with something interesting, a challenge. If water isn't Bastian's primary fear, then he must prove it right here and now. He must swim inside the lake immediately. Bastian does as he is bid. He doesn't want to come out as a coward, and to be frank, there is something else that drives him into the depths of the lake, even though he is highly conscious of that factor. Chloe tells him again and again to go deeper into the water, and every other time, her voice changes. She grabs the end of her shirt and starts pulling it up slowly. Bastian struggles to stay on the surface, but he isn't used to swimming. And so the small waves cover him entirely, until he forces himself to the surface once more. Chloe is already running back into the woods at this point. Bastian missed it. He comes out of the lake, feeling stupid, feeling played with, and this sense doubles as he sees Chloe talking with her ex-boyfriend. The weather changes abruptly after Bastian heads towards home. The sky quickly becomes overcast, and the afternoon gets dark as he listens to music. After a while, Chloe comes home, quickly changes her clothes, and rolls up in her bed quietly. She's in a terrible, sorrowful mood. Something has clearly happened to her, but she says nothing. Bastian's first reaction is to get her ice cream. He rushes downstairs as if his worst fear were chasing him, and he goes back into the bedroom slowly and calmly. Gradually, Chloe starts talking. She avoided saying her worst fear back at the lake, but now she feels a need to express it. She always fails to fit in. What if this never changes? She's afraid she will end up alone. Right away, Bastian is reminded of his silly fear, and he makes a joke about it. Chloe laughs. Gloom seems to be slowly leaving her system. She still thinks that Bastian's fear is the worst. The latter tells her to prove it, and unexpectedly, she starts playing out Bastian's worst fear, proving to him that there's nothing to be so frightened about. This process is extremely amusing to her. They are building a puzzle with Bastian's little brother in the next scene. The weather gets better, and the future of this day seems bright. But suddenly, Brian and Oliver appear on the doorstep. Chloe didn't know that they were going to visit today, and neither did Bastian. He's extremely upset. In the next scene, the three are sitting on a pier nearby. The atmosphere is peaceful, but there is great tension around the trio. Oliver is letting Chloe know that her obsession with the ghost at the lake is childish. He is the oldest one in the group, and he wants to act like it. When Chloe gets upset and leaves to get more drinks, Oliver asks Bastian what the deal is between him and Chloe. With a sly smile, he adds that he knows about what happened at the lake this morning. Therefore, it is only natural that he is interested in whether something is going on between the two. Most importantly, he wants to know if they had sex. Bastian quietly listens to him. Slowly, an ambiguous smile appears on his face. He wants Oliver to leave Chloe alone, and he also knows that saying yes will significantly raise his status in Oliver's eyes. And so, he makes a mistake and nods in approval. Oliver gets excited, but before they can continue their conversation, Chloe gets back. That night, they are brushing their teeth together in silence. Another day is over, and the summer will soon reach its end. Chloe is the first one to break the silence. She doesn't want him to leave. These words and the warm intent behind them warm Bastian's heart. Chloe turns off the lights then, and for the first time, they hug each other firmly to celebrate the unusual but real bond that was set between them throughout this summer. Nothing of extreme significance happens on the next day, but it's clear, when Bastian thinks of Chloe and the summer he spent with her as the years pass, he will think of this day, and feel a tide of overwhelming pleasure. In the next scene, the adults discuss the date of their departure. It seems like tomorrow, at the break of dawn, Bastian and his family will leave the lake house. The dinner table still seems cheerful, though. Bastian and Chloe are having fun, but suddenly, Chloe gets a message from Oliver. Gradually, as she reads the contents of the letter, her expressions turn dark. She looks up at Bastian for just a second, then looks down at her phone and leaves the table. Bastian's mind dives into Right away, he is reminded of the conversation he had with Oliver 2 days ago, and he finds himself following Chloe in anxious anticipation. What if Oliver told her everything? To his misfortune, Bastian discovers that this is exactly what happened. He finds Chloe enraged, calling him a filthy liar. Afterwards, she storms away from the kitchen, gets on her bike, and cycles away. Bastian doesn't even try to justify himself. He made a terrible mistake by lying to Oliver, and now his friendship with Chloe is ruined. He spends the entire evening alone. The never-ending thoughts of guilt and shame conquer his mind. The summer could have ended perfectly, but he ruined everything. His actions were completely unjustifiable. And so, by the time it is already dark, he's still sitting on his bed, feeling terrible. Chloe comes back home then, and Bastian pretends to be asleep as she enters the room to grab her jacket. Then she leaves again. Tomorrow, Bastian will leave. He will have no more chances to turn things around. Out of nowhere, a sense of hope comes to him, and he stands up to follow her. She guides him to a huge campfire where young people, including Oliver of course, are gathered. Bastian watches them from a distance for a while, and then realizes that coming here was a mistake. Anxiously, he turns his bike around and disappears into the darkness, but suddenly, he hears a voice coming from the woods. It's Stan. He noticed him, and now he will not let him go. He leads him to the campfire, and makes him promise that this time he won't leave early. Turning around now would be weird and rude, so poor Bastian follows his lead. The youngsters receive him warmly, mostly because he is the youngest one in the group. Everyone loves him. Perhaps this is exactly why Bastian fails to truly connect with anybody while sitting at the campfire, watching Chloe and Oliver flirt. It is painful to be here. And if all this wasn't enough, soon Bastian sees the couple stand up and disappear into the shadows. He regrets coming here. Now he's as alone as ever. Somebody offers to smoke then, and he agrees. And when the first light appears in the east, he rushes towards the lake to throw up. He's too young for any of this. When he's done, he looks back to the campfire, where young people have a contest to have the most fun. Bastian wishes to be a part of it, but he just doesn't fit in. Then he looks in front of him and sees a picture that is even more hurtful. Chloe and Oliver are in the lake, busy with each other, failing to notice anything around them. Others join in then, and the surface of the lake stirs up as they call Bastian to come into the water too. All the poor kid wants is to go home. He wants it all to end as soon as possible. But it will only prove his weakness, and besides, he made a promise to stay. And so, slowly, like the ugly duckling, he struggles against the weight of the lake water to catch up with his so-called friends. But the latter have no intention to wait for him. The commotion that their waving hands create on the lake fades out in the distance as Bastian gasps for air and calls for the last of his powers to save himself from drowning. The next morning, his family packs up, says goodbye to Louise, and drives to the shore of the lake in search of Bastian. When they get out of the car and start scoping the lake area, we see Bastian approach them from behind. His family is unable to see him, so he still has some time to think. Reluctantly, he watches his family, and finally decides to avoid them. He runs back, knowing where Chloe will be, and feeling that he still has the power to decide how this summer ends. The only thing he must do is give it one more try, one last chance. He finds Chloe sitting alone on the pier. She senses his approach, shakes lightly, and finally looks back at him.